Hey everyone, this is your OG, Original Gamer, and this is another Godforge video. Today we will be providing you a speed recap, another one on the Fateless Podcast with Chosen. He was joined today by MTG Jedi and Ragewood. The leaks are subtle but sincerely exciting. Watch till the end to learn more about MTG's faction pet idea. Without blinking, let's optimize. All right, so
Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Fateless Podcast episode, and joining me for the two guests today is going to be Ragewood and MTG Jedi.
All right, so we're going to give you a speed recap here. If you do not have the time to watch the full 40 minutes or whatnot of the podcast, we're going to break it down and give you the highlights as quick as we can, hopefully in about 10 to 12 minutes worth of time. So, MTG Jedi and Ragewood both give their intros. MTG Jedi covers Rage, Shadow Legends. He also has a Godforge channel too. Ragewood mentions he's subbing in to help out. They talk about the Alpha Tower and what questions they have. MTG says they thinks that the alpha beta concept that they're employing is going to be more widely adopted because of its simplicity, how well it works. They both he asked Chosen, how do you know when you're ready for the alpha? Of course, Chosen said on the game side, you never feel fully ready, but you have to cut it off and you have to launch at some point, even though you always want another month to refine and make it better. He said they have two different windows. They're shooting for April and May or October, November launch dates. I have done all the research on a go-to-market strategy video on when Fateless should launch its global launch and why. If you think that's a video you'd like to see, drop something in the comments below and we will definitely put that one out soon, but I had done all the research on this already. Anyways, not to jump off target, Chosen talks about the difficulty of being transparent and how it's great to be transparent because it builds, gamers have this shared buy-in in the development of the game and they feel like they've been a part of it, but it is difficult because judgments are made before things are done. He said, it's kind of like you get a test and the teacher is grading it before you finish the test. So they understood that. Ragewood asked MTG about his board game. He talks about how, his gurus are telling him he should be at Kickstarter already, but he wants more to have the game done before he goes to Kickstarter, where a lot of people use Kickstarter. They have an MVP and they go to Kickstarter to raise the seed funds that they're going to use to build out their proof of concept. Now, what MTG is highlighting here is that he doesn't necessarily need seed funds. He's built the game and the proof of concept. What he needs is called bridge funds, which is a different form of funding. And while Kickstarter is more of a seed funding area, this is why he's kind of getting a little pushback, is because the bridge funding is what he needs to bring it to market and to handle the marketing tasks rather than the proof of concept design and build costs. Anyways, totally off topic. But anyways, he talks about the new game joy and having being all in for a game and just being so excited about it. He wants that for his game. He thinks that's going to be the way it is for Godforge too. Chosen says, yeah, but you're always wondering how long will it last? Is it only a week? Or, what if we could have a game that for 2 years just always has that new game joy, that new game feel? So then he asks, so the transparency, what needs to be in the testing alpha. So MTG mentions he's more of a finished game player. He's not really a testing round type player, but the unique experience of the alpha cavern intrigues him, that he won't get a chance to do it ever again. And so he says he'd love to see some champs from every faction, and that, the factions have some specific element that's unique to them. Ragewood talks about he'd love to see customization of characters so that he could build his character maybe different than MTG would build his. So that was interesting. He also mentions Cursed as a debuff and says looks like it's an Aru-based kind of debuff. He would like to see that applied to the other factions, something he gives for an example like Freeze for Asgard or a Darkness debuff for Virage. So that I thought was a really interesting idea. Chosen then talks about his desire for leaderboards and that sort of types of recognition to show the alpha leaders. We are going to be putting out a video here real soon on gamer personality. Like, what is your gamer personality? Are you more competitive, as maybe Chosen is? Are you more cooperative? You prefer to build communities and worlds with other people? There's a whole mess of different gamer personalities, and none of them are right or wrong. But Brad talks about here, obviously, like what's important to his gamer personality. Ragewood mentions he also wants to be number one as well. So he certainly has a competitive spirit. And MTG mentions that he loves the free-to-play that Hell Hades puts on it for Raid every year. And he thinks that this alpha testing cavern is going to be very similar to that and how fun it'll be. He says the other rewards are really cool, like skins and stuff like that. But he would love to see if you got to choose like maybe one skin out of 4 or 5 or something like that. So I thought that was a great contribution from MTG as well. Ragewood then talks about how he asked the question to Chosen, how much did Hell Hades free-to-play challenge influence the Alpha Cavern? Now, of course, Chosen was smart to not speak for Simon, but he said, I'm sure Simon learned a lot from it. It's influenced him to a degree, and it was a lot of fun for the community, so why not, And he also has his experience with Diablo 4, and he talked about how he'd been advocating for that since he started with Fateless, where, he got to go to Blizzard's headquarters, and there was something there, and the top 1,000 players got, recognized for all time. So he talked about that, and he wants to see a statue in the game where you can like zoom in and see that top 1,000 alpha cavern testers of like that diorama, or maybe like a Mount Rushmore style. So MTG asks a really important question here. He asks if the content creators will be able to make videos during this alpha testing phase. Chosen cannot give us a definitive answer. He says he's got to confirm, but he thinks that it would be the case, but he wasn't able to confirm. Then, okay, so Chosen, it's important to note that we get into this later in the video, but Chosen's role is basically he goes into the lore and the mythology, and then he builds the initial kits for characters, and then sends those kits off to the rest of the team. So he makes sure that the kit is lore appropriate, like we're not giving freeze to a fire god or something like that. And then he works on the balancing afterwards. So he is really excited here to talk about the ultimate system. So I think we should be really excited to listen to it, because it means it's probably their secret sauce and very important. But Ragewood mentions, it's definitely breaking the speed meta, because he asks, what do they understand about it? And MTG says, you do certain actions and you build up this meter and then you can use your ultimate. He says, yep, those are both right. He says, basically, it gives you two choices. You could be super fast and not have your ultimate as often, or not go as fast, have less turns, but your turns are more impactful. So you're going to need to find the balance for each champ, but it creates more build diversity. Also, this is a big one. He says ultimates break in the turn meter. We knew this. We'd called this out in earlier videos ourselves when we called out the ultimates very early on. So that's a big piece we'll get into a little bit later. Ragewood mentions and makes a really good point here about the initiative stat and how he said he believes it's a passive turn gain for divinity. We've been wondering how much divinity do you gain each time. Initiative could be that stat. So that's a really awesome contribution he made as well. He definitely goes on to say we do not know like the class specific ultimate info, like a healer or a slayer or a brawler or an invoker, how that works. We don't know that yet. But he's looking for someone whose kit boosts the divinity of all the other team members. Maybe, and Chosen calls this out. So yeah, maybe there'll be a bad hero, kind of a trash hero, but who can boost others' ultimates, and then your other three can just slam, and that works. So there's an early way to make every champion important or potentially important. MTG says he likes that because in a lot of games he's played, he says if speed is the only meta, then there really is no meta. And I think that's a great point. And having these two different choices, two different ways to build, is going to immediately give you a choice as to which meta you want to go down. MTG also talks about triangles of power and checks and balances between, this beat, almost like rock, paper, scissors, if you were. Chosen says, yeah, I've seen that in like nearly every game or environment. Then MTG pushes him and says, you need to reveal something new. And he says, well, ultimates are kind of talking a lot about that here. It's a big thing. But then he confirms that they can be cast outside your turn. So the example he gives is like, okay, it's Zeus's turn, but Aphrodite has her ultimate, so she cuts in. And so we know Aphrodite has 102 speed. She's tied for the second fastest speed. I think we may also have seen like she has like a debuff or a crowd control, and she's got like decent accuracy, I think. So like maybe she jumps out ahead and like stuns or uses some crowd control, and then that keeps any of the opponents from taking a turn, and then that allows your other players to not really have to worry about speed. So really neat in terms of team building. It doesn't have to be sort of a one-trick pony where you have to build speed and then whatever else you can build on top of it is whatever else you can build. So you don't need to put speed on everyone, it looks like, but you really, it'll be more about building each role to its appropriate focus. MTG then asks about this game design experience that Chosen has had, and because he's building his board game. And so Chosen, this is where he talks about, starting a character and making sure it all makes sense, and then pushing it out to the other team, and then getting feedback and rebalancing and stuff like that, and sort of that iterative process. And he said, MTG asked what has been different than he's expected. He said, there's a lot of knowledgeable and passionate people in the team, and sometimes they disagree. Like one says this should be the way, and another says no, absolutely not, that shouldn't be the way. And he said, so it's really hard, or they work hard on how they manage that. So in EuroG's experience, it's super important to ensure that everyone feels heard, but that the expectation isn't out there that just because you're heard means we go with you, because sometimes the final direction is something else that is chosen, right? No pun intended there. But Chosen talks about how he builds out the initial kits for the characters, ensures the lore and mythology is appropriate, and then the balance to their strength is good in the game. He talks about challenges like having too many fire and burn type gods in mythology, but he can't have 100 characters in the game with burn. MTG offers a really interesting idea. He called it incinerate. Ragewood called it smolder, but the idea that your debuffs would compile. So the first one you put on, it's only burning you lightly, and then you put another one on, and rather than a linear effect, it has more of a compounding effect, and it can kill you maybe in 3 or 4 applications of a burn versus having to put 9 or 10 or a lot of them. Chosen mentions the team having this exact conversation, so I would expect this type of feature to be in the game where putting a debuff 1, 2, or 3 has a compounding effect rather than a linear one. Sorry. Then they get to which god or myth or legend would you include in the game. MTG calls out one of EuroG's favorites. He calls Cerberus out. Awesome, great pick. I love Cerberus. We called him out in a previous video because we got the pups. He also goes on to mention a really interesting idea that maybe there should be faction pets. And he said this could be cool because let's say you have a 4-champion fight and you have all of a sudden a 5th spot and you can revive your champion pet, or a champion on your team dies and instead of reviving them, you revive the pet instead from the faction or the pantheon or whatever. Neat idea. I liked what he was going with it. Ragewood's already been on the channel, so he didn't offer one. But EuroG is going to offer a crazy one. Here's a myth legend champion I'd love to see. For Virage, I'd love to see Nikolai Tesla. Right? Who has greater magic and electricity? And then that guy, he understood physics. Nikolai Tesla would be a cool one. Anyways, they wrap up here with their sign-offs and talking about what they're doing. Ragewood obviously has the best website for Godforge you can go to get all the updated information, all the champions we know. EuroG works to help Ragewood keep that all updated. So I'm telling you, it's the best place you can go to get Godforge information. He also talks about playing Etheria as well while he's waiting for Godforge to come out. MTG talks about his Lord of the Rings style board game that's going to Kickstarter this summer. He talks about how he's still doing raid videos and he enjoys it, but he has a Godforge channel and he's really looking forward to Godforge as well. So that is where we are going to end it. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you like this speed recap, like it, subscribe to the channel. We'll be doing one every week. Thanks so much for stopping by. Take care of yourself, and remember, play smarter.